Hey guys, if you thought 50 Shades Freed was the only bad film to come out this weekend, well, unfortunately, I have to tell you otherwise. Today I went to go see two different films, Peter Rabbit and 1517 to Paris. We'll start off with Peter Rabbit because that's the first one I saw, and then we'll end on 1517 to Paris. Peter Rabbit follows, well, Peter Rabbit, played by James Corden, as it follows the typical Toy Story storyline of, oh yeah, there's a natural order to things, and some new person comes into the mix, and our lead character gets jealous that the adoptive person that we're following, Andy slash B, the woman that's in the film, she's getting, taken by Admiral Hux, and he gets jealous, and so they start a whole war in the garden, and that's pretty much where we are with Peter Rabbit. Peter Rabbit, as I mentioned before, this is a Toy Story type movie. It's the same plot, the same beats, only without the talking toys or anything funny at all. Unfortunately, this film doesn't really do anything to change up the formula of children's movies, and maybe it doesn't have to, but I always think back to the movie, the Peanuts movie, when it comes to adapting books or comics into films, because they usually adapt it in the same sense of this is how it should be. It doesn't need to be fully modernized, but Peter Rabbit is pretty much a generic kids film, and that's kind of upsetting, considering that, well, it's still kind of bad. There is some parts where I kind of chuckled, but there are times in this movie where it breaks the fourth wall, and it expects you to take it seriously, but unfortunately, it doesn't. Like, there's one part in the movie where one of the characters is allergic to some sort of berry, I think blackberry or whatnot, and Beatrix and Peter Rabbit is like, oh well, I hope he eats one of them and dies. And one of the characters is like, well, what if someone has a problem with that? There are people who have illnesses, and they take out like maybe a full minute and a half to basically address the audience of like, oh yeah, allergies are nothing to be joking about. I don't want to get any letters. And Peter Rabbit, while he says that very last line, getting letters, he looks to the audience for 2 seconds as if to acknowledge, yeah, we're going to be a safe movie for your kids. We don't want to do anything actually kind of funny in this movie. We want to make a safe and respectful kids film. And that's Peter Rabbit. It's too safe. It's not funny, but I will give the movie this. On the visual effects department, it looks kind of nice. The rabbits look really good, especially Peter Rabbit, who has the most detail with individual hairs and actually looks like a bunny, which is actually really commendable on the animation front. But then there are other characters in the movie that look like complete and utter dog shit. Like, there's a deer that looks really bad, there's a rooster that looks bad, and there's a reoccurring joke with him, and I didn't quite enjoy that one either. All in all, Peter Rabbit is pretty much paint by numbers. It's kind of like a mixture of all the worst elements of a kid's film nowadays, and the movie's alright for little kids, but if you're looking for a pure adaptation of the original source, it becomes way too modernized and it loses the identity of Peter Rabbit. And that's all I have to say. Peter Rabbit gets a C-. And now we're off to the train station in the 1517 to Paris. Now, this is a very interesting movie to critique because this movie has the involvement of the original 3 people who actually performed the tasks that were in the movie. The events of the train and the 3 military members who took down a armed terrorist on a train from Amsterdam to Paris is highly commendable. They were really brave then, and they deserve the utmost respect from everyone. That being said, the movie is complete garbage. Now, don't get me wrong, movies about real life events should be handled with a bit of care, right? When it comes to certain events, there needs to be some caressing of it. But this movie wastes so much time on frivolous details that it bored me half to death until the final 15 minutes, because the whole thing that we're building up to is the incident on the train, and the last 15 minutes take place on that train. And there is parts in the movie where it kind of intersplices certain things from the event inside of the first and second acts, but it doesn't really make sense. Most of the movie is just explaining the backstory behind the three and how they were friends in middle school and how they grew up with each other and they created a bond, which is actually pretty decent. I also like the fact that they're played by the actual people, but that doesn't excuse any of the other acting in the movie. There's problems with the acting from the other actors. Like, they're kind of bad. Some of them are wooden, but the most surprising thing about this film is that Jaleel White, Steve Urkel himself, Sonic the Hedgehog, is in this movie for like 2 seconds. I was like when he showed up, I was like, what? Why are you in this film? Why? Like, I'm sitting there in the very back of the theater, arms out above my head, and I'm like, hey, why are you here in this movie? Like, he's there for 2 seconds, and he's not brought up again. I mean, he's a cool actor, but they don't really make good use of him at all. But anyways, most of the movie, again, as I said before, it meanders on pointless details. And here's the thing. This story is something to be told, but I don't think it needed to be an hour and a half long. Most of the movie is just them, growing up, and then the second act of the movie is where I really lost interest, because most of the second act of the movie is of the three traveling in Europe, and there's nothing there, really, and it's like they just travel. That's all they do. They just travel. There's nothing interesting going on. There's no revelations, nothing. It's just kind of bland. It's like they took out maybe some of the more interesting parts of the story that they were adapting and said, hey, we're just going to tell them the straightforward story, which is all right, but you got to add something new. This is a movie we're talking about. It has to have stakes, and while most of the stakes are at the end, there's nothing in the first and second acts that really want me to be invested in the story. Half the time I was nearly falling asleep, and that's unfortunate because the story of these people in real life, the real life story, was interesting, but they couldn't make it more interesting in this movie, and that's kind of a crime, really. It's a very interesting story, and this film really does kind of taste a lot like America. Like, there's a lot of like pro-America stuff, and I'm not against that, right? But it felt a lot at times a bit forced in the first act. Like, what the mother character is a little bit overly religious to the point where she won't consider science, and there's even one line that I absolutely hate, and it's in most religious movies nowadays, where it's like, oh, my God is bigger than your statistics. That's literally one line for the movie. And ever since then, like, there's points in the movie where I just had to facepalm, because some of the dialogue in this just stinks. It stunk. And that's where we are. The 1517 to Paris is a very disappointing movie on many angles. From a writing perspective, from an acting perspective, from the directional perspective, which is kind of odd because this is being directed and produced by Clint Eastwood, who's been known to do other good work like Billion Dollar Baby and other films, but the 1517 to Paris is just very boring. It's just like Sully, where they have like this cool incident, but most of the movie is just boring, and there's no drama there. And it's just kind of sad to see all these, like Clint Eastwood just go down the drain in quality when it comes to direction and producing. And even in the cinematography, it felt very amateurish. It wasn't really good, and I don't really recommend it. Even if the true life events really do intrigue you as an audience member, it really doesn't at all. So I'm going to give the 1517 to Paris a D+. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to Spirit Man Studios. Next week, we're going to be reviewing Black Panther and also Early Man. I hope to get a screening of that because I'm a big Armin animation fan. And also, be on the lookout, Valentine's Day, I have a special episode of Flashback, and I won't tell you exactly what the review is, but it's actually kind of fun. I've pretty much recorded most of it, and I'll be editing it through the weekend. So yeah, that'll be fun. So, stay tuned, keep the cameras rolling, and I'll see you next time. Peace.